Let's talk about some clever lineups the Indiana Pacers could throw out this coming season. They've got a couple new players, a bunch of new ideas, and with a young and growing roster, a lot of ways to experiment. We'll break it all down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today, we're going with clever lineups, talking about some lineups, some creativity that the Pacers and Rick Carlisle could use this season to maximize some young players, to mix and match, to prep for the future, to see what they have in certain guys, to get shooting out there, to get defense out there, all of the above in some of these cases. Just some ways to get five-man units out there that aren't the traditionally discussed starting fives, closing fives, and things like that. It's always a fun exercise for me to see how they could mix and match rotation that could maybe lead me to think maybe Aaron Nesmith could play some more. Maybe O'Shea Brissett could play a little less, just because of the number of lineups that make sense for those players to fit into. So I'll go through three lineups today that I was thinking about recently for various reasons that I think would make sense for the Pacers this year, and go into detail on why I think it would be good for them to try this season, both for this year and beyond, and just for general experimenting purposes. So before we talk about that really quick, I want to point out the schedule is out. If you're interested in the Pacers schedule, I'll have a column up on Forbes Sports about it with some of the details, numbers, key dates, etc. behind it. Yes, there will be a podcast breaking that down, because while it is 82 games, 41 home and away, I get the simplification part of it. There is more to it in terms of back-to-backs, timing, road trips, and things like that that make it never as simple as people seem to make it out to be. So one of my favorite podcasts every year, Adam Friedman, old co-host of the show, and I will go through it game by game to predict the Pacers record. Last year, we were way off despite being lower on the team than most. But in past years before that, we've gotten pretty dang close to about what the Pacers end up at. And there's another player interview I recorded earlier today that will also be out early next week. Tomorrow, I'm on vacation, and there will be no Friday podcast for this show, still 4 days a week for most of August. Let's talk about lineups, as we're now through the administrative portion of the podcast. And the first one is one that I think you'll see a lot of this year, in some form of four of these players at least, but a lot of cases all five. And that's because it's what I consider the air quotes lineup of the future for the Pacers. And that's Tyrese Haliburton at the 1, Benedict Mathurin / Chris Duarte at the 2, the other one of those players at the 3. Doesn't matter which one's in which spot. Isaiah Jackson at the 4, Jalen Smith at the 5, again with those two. It does not matter which one is at which spot. Those guys, to an extent, are the future of the franchise, right? Mathurin's the youngest player on the team. Jackson's the second youngest. Smith is the third youngest. Haliburton is the fourth youngest. And then Duarte's older, obviously, but in terms of experience in the league, he is a second-year player. He is very young. Like, that is the future of this team, is those guys, in theory, clicking, being a quality lineup, having the tools to be successful. And that's why I think you'll see a lot of it this year. Maybe they don't start. I mean, Miles Turner projects to start over one of those bigs. Perhaps Buddy Hield starts over one of those wings. But in general, I think that combination you'll see a lot of, and especially just in general, various groups of those guys. I think the Pacers and Rick Carlisle would be smart to say, we want to see as much of, for example, Mathurin plus Duarte on the wings as possible. There's been a lot of discussion this summer from fans about what's Chris Duarte's best role. Is he best as this sixth man scorer type? I think he should start, because I think at his best role could be 3 and D. And if that's the case, you want him to start and be next to your best players all times. But figuring that out is important, and figuring out how he plays next to Benedict Mathurin in particular is important. How do they best mesh? The more they play together is important. But in general, any combination here is key, right? Smith and Jackson, can they be a front court partnership that's always there? Haliburton and any of these guys. Haliburton's the face of the franchise right now. How does he gel with several of these players is very important. And for Mathurin in particular, I think you'll see a lot of forced minutes with him and some guys. Not forced like this is unnatural and shouldn't be happening right now, but just even when he's slumping or even when the team is struggling, Ben Mathurin plus pick young player will get some creative burn all the time, because he maybe isn't the face of the franchise in the way Haliburton is, but he's their highest pick in 3 decades. The Pacers care a great deal about the success of him in the future and how he fits with the players they have. And if he's not good, obviously this isn't the case, but if he's even pretty good or meets the expectation of the sixth pick, knowing who he fits the best with matters for who you decide is on your team long term. The better he fits with young guys, the more likely they are to be on this team for a long time. The same goes for Tyrese Halliburton. So having Halliburton plus Mathurin plus any one of those guys, to me, is the most important thing the Pacers can do in any lineup, beyond the specific success of this group and stuff like that. So especially so in the backcourt with Halliburton, Mather, and Duarte. How do they fit together? What other guys and skills fit with them, right? Does a stretch big like Smith work better? Does a lob threat at the five like Jackson work better? Does a switchy defender like Brissett work a little better, or is Neesmith a better option if you can even squeak him in there at all? Or do they need more rebounding to go with Terry Taylor? A lot of names in theory in the mix, but just seeing what fits, what makes sense. And obviously it's a longer term project than one season, but in general, I think that's pretty important. And Jackson and Smith, I mentioned briefly, but they are two of the young bigs that kind of represent the future of the front court for the Pacers. Maybe Goga Batadze sneaks in that mix. I still have belief in him as an NBA player, unlike some at this stage of his career. And O'Shea Brissett, a talented 24-year-old at this stage, who the Pacers could keep around very easily with full bird rights next year, right? If Smith and Jackson don't fit and they're both more naturally fives, or Smith isn't the shooter that he looked like he could be for the Pacers at times last year, or Jackson can't be a five and has to be the four, and then you have to move other stuff around. How do they gel? Can they be pieces together? All these questions and all of these things you think about as the team transitions from one era to the next with their future in mind will be answered by the more minutes this lineup plays. The more often any combination of these five can be out there at the same time will be beneficial for the Pacers this season as a data point, as an evaluation point, and for the Pacers long term as they get chemistry, play together, and grow into what the team can be. I think them being able to grow at the same time sort of gives them a head start over rookies who can't play as much, like Jalen Smith in his prior situation, like Aaron Neesmith in his prior situation. And I know it seems like it will be full of hurdles, but there's a lot of indicators that this could actually work kind of well. Tyrese Halliburton and Chris Duarte last season didn't play together very much, just over 100 minutes, but those minutes went pretty well, right? A minus 1.5 net rating is bad. That's a negative. I don't want to sit here and tell you that a minus 1.5 net rating is something that the Pacers should be celebrating. But in the context of what the Pacers were after the Halliburton trade, when they win, 5 games for the whole rest of the season and had the worst defense in the league, to at least look like a credible team at that stage is noteworthy. And a minus 1.5 net rating settles you in at like a 35 win team last year if you just do the net rating versus wins calculation. Like, that's much better than the Pacers actually were. That lineup, even being a little bad, was kind of successful. You add in better players or pieces for the future, that makes sense. Tyrese Halliburton and Isaiah Jackson together last season, 300 minutes. Pacers net rating minus 0.2, basically even. Defense, really bad. Offense, spectacular, right? And even net rating is like a 40-win team. I don't think the Pacers are that good for many reasons, but you're sniffing the plan with just the minutes of those two. And these are small sample sizes, so obviously these aren't sustainable things, but still, also noteworthy. Tyrese Halliburton plus Jalen Smith last season. Guess what? Same story. Best net rating with both of those guys on. Now, it was that pairing wasn't as good. The offense was a 116, which is good. The defense was atrocious. Minus 4 with those two on, which is bad, but still a better net rating than what a lot of the Pacers were down the stretch of last season. So I think what you'll see is that lineup, while it will struggle and grow together, it will still be better than it seems like just a typical young guy unit. I think you'll see more success with that group, mostly because they're being led by Halliburton, who's good. But in general, they have pieces that fit together and have shown success together in the past. I don't think it's as rigid as those five. I think those five are the guys that they would like to mix and match in there the most. But you have Goga Batadze, like I said earlier, on this team, who is roughly, he's younger than Brissett. He's about the same age as Neesmith, right? He's a guy, 2 months apart from Neesmith in age. He's a guy you might want to get out there and see what he can be and see how he can fit. Now, it might be hard to figure out which other young guy to bench, but he makes some sense in there. Neesmith as well, another 1999 born player, only 22 right now. Can they try to fit him in there in one of the wing spots at times? O'Shea Brissett, like I said, still young in his case as well, just turned 24 in June. Can they fit him in there? If they're in and it's not those five, that's fine. But just in general, seeing as many young guys as possible all together, I think is something the Pacers need to pursue for their future, but also because it could be one of their better lineups now, because Tyrese Halliburton should be playing as often as possible. He's the future of the franchise, and slamming him in with as many lineups as you can, with as many young guys as you can that happen to also fit well and give you lots of data points. For example, seeing that he and Isaiah Jackson played very well together last season. I think is very noteworthy. A lob threat and a switchy defender next to Tyrese Halliburton obviously makes sense, but just knowing it and stylizing it means, okay, keep exploring that. Can they play with another five? Does Jackson need to be the five? Things like that. You'll learn a lot just from this lineup and as many mixing and matching pairings as possible. Let's move to another one that I had a fun time thinking about. The Pacers' best five defenders, all in one unit. And that's just not their best five defenders, but the best possible lineup they could create. Before we do that, though, I want to talk to you guys about Built Bar Puffs. Built Bar in general is making the best tasting protein bars ever. Fantastic company. And they make delicious protein bars, which is rare these days. The ones you buy in the store are either chalky or way too chewy or don't taste like what they say they taste like. Nate Duncan used to describe them as store-bought protein bars as something that tastes like the inside of a sawmill, which I agree with. But Built Bar does not taste like that. 100% covered in chocolate, delicious protein bars that basically taste like a candy bar. That's what makes them so great. They have so many delicious flavors. You can get their mixed package on their website with 11 of their most popular flavors. They also have a new flavor, cookie dough chunk puff. It literally has little cookie dough chunks right on top of it. Little marshmallow puff infusion there. 100% covered in chocolate. Delicious and healthy. That flavor has 160 calories, but 15 grams of collagen protein that your body can absorb faster. You've got to try Built Bar. Go to their website, built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 when you check out. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code again is LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Jazz. You're the boss man and founder of the network, David Locke, talk about the Jazz because Donovan Mitchell back in the news. Jazz and Knicks reignite trade talks around young star Donovan Mitchell. David Locke will have all the latest for you over at Locked On Jazz if you want more on that. Let's talk about another Pacers lineup that I am interested in. And boy, am I full. I was just at the State Fair and I had a giant tenderloin and a corn dog. It was fantastic. I need more defense and self-control against food. The Pacers' best defensive lineup, that segue sucked. I just wanted to talk about the food that I ate earlier today that was fantastic. The Pacers' best defensive lineup is tricky to actually materialize and think about. They have a lot of guys who, in theory, could be in the mix to me. Daniel Tice is a quality defender at times. Where does he fit in to the Pacers center rotation will be interesting. Mathurin could end up being a decent defender. I usually think rookies will suck on defense, really be bad. And Duarte's team defense wasn't good last year, but he actually was an exception to my normal rule. He was a pretty good, especially on-ball defender for a first-year player, right? So who's in the mix here? I think the five-man best Pacers defensive lineup is sort of obvious with a few guys in the mix. And that would be TJ McConnell at the 1, Chris Duarte at the 2, Aaron Nesmith at the 3. You can flip those, doesn't matter to me. Isaiah Jackson at the 4, and Miles Turner at the 5. There might be one name you guys are just shocked I skipped over. I'll promise I will bring him up at some point in this segment. Not only do I think that's their best defensive 5, I think in general when you conceptualize lineups, something to think about is, it's 106 to 105, or well, I guess it's 2022 now. It's 116 to 115 with 2 seconds left in the game. The Pacers are winning and they need a stop, right? What 5 guys do they throw on the floor? And this season could be different than most Pacers seasons in that they could just decide to go 5 young players, development, see how they figure it out and go. But if they really want to stop, they really want to go for the win. It seems like some combo or most of or all of the players I just said should be the guys in that group. TJ McConnell, short, and that obviously is limiting for him defensively, but really pesky, really smart, really heady, really good steals guy in the passing lanes, reads the game well. Great on-ball point of attack defender at his size. Still struggles at times because of that size and that aggressiveness, but in general, a good defender. Chris Duarte, like I said, good on-ball defender, is getting better at the pattern recognition. Quality defender, good footwork. Aaron Nesmith, he's the question mark of this group to me, right? He's got the athleticism and the traits to stay in front of most guys, but not the bulkiest guy. Can he hang with threes? Does he have to be the guy on the twos? Does it matter who's on the 2 and who's on the 3? Who knows? But how can Nesmith help in this group? I think his athleticism could allow him to be on 2s or 3s in the situation. Isaiah Jackson projects to be maybe the most unique defender the Pacers have ever employed. Having him out in defensive groups makes all the sense in the world with his athleticism, speed, switchiness, and everything. He's got to cut down the fouls, though. If his fouling is still really dismal as a negative this season, it might not make sense to have him close games. And Miles Turner is one of the best 10 defensive players on planet Earth. There's no reason to discuss why he is in this group. I think that group would be pretty good at stopping anything except for the Pacers' classic problem A big, bulky wing. How are they going to stop those guys? Because they have fewer options this year than ever before. Like Justin Holiday was very at it, but at least he was the right height. Torrey Craig was at least solid at it, actually, but they had to trade a lot and give away a lot on offense. They're the slowest ones. Sabonis could, in theory, guard, but the quicker ones just completely torched him. I mean, those were their best options in the past. They don't have any of those guys anymore. Like Neesmith, I guess, with the athleticism, may be an option on these wings. Terry Taylor's got some strength and speed combo. Brissett, in theory, he's probably the guy you were shocked I skipped over when reading through the five names, is the right height and switchiness to do it, but he lacks some of the girth. And Daniel Tice is not quick enough, despite being, a generally heady defender. So they are really going to struggle with those guys anyway. So I think you just kind of pray you get enough from the eliteness of those guys in a team concept, or the athleticism of any one guy on a wing can hold them for just long enough. I think that outside of that player prototype, which a lot of teams have, this group could work really well together. In general, I think Miles Turner infused lineups will just be good defensively for the Pacers. With Miles Turner on this past season, Pacers defensive rating was 112. With him off, it went up to 118.7. For reference on a 112 defensive rating, by the way, that would have ranked about 15th, about average in the NBA. And we're talking about the Pacers, who finished with the third worst defense in the league last year and dead last from the All-Star break on. I'm not saying an average defense is good, but considering a lot of the Pacers' defensive numbers, how bad their schemes worked out for the roster they had, how lackluster effort they got from a lot of their backcourt players, with Turner on the floor, they were a good enough average, if you will, defensive team, which is not enough to get by, but enough to give you something, especially when their offense was 18th in the league last year. Right, with Turner on, their net rating was minus 0.4. That's basically 38 to 41 win team. Not the bar you want, but does show a lot about what his value can be in a way that their record last year didn't. So I think he's a lock. He's the only lock really for the Pacers' best defensive five, and that's because he can just do everything, switch, and be there. And now Neesmith is interesting here. I talked about him already, but the athleticism, it will be kind of a new wrinkle, honestly, on the wing. Like I talked about all the guys that they've in theory had. Basically, since Thad Young, their wing stoppers have had, either some great team defense in Justin Holiday, or a lot of strength and peskiness in Torrey Craig, and Duarte's skills on the ball are nice, but they haven't really had the athletic wing defender like Neesmith can be. Now, he's not, strong enough really for me to think he can guard everybody in the spot. He's only 6'5", 215, right? Like that's not the size you're looking for in these wing stoppers all the time. So he's sort of the question mark-ish guy of the group. But the wrinkle he gives being an athletic wing, at least to me, is interesting on the end of the floor. If they need more size, it's not crazy to me that they could go McConnell, Duarte, Brissett, Jackson Turner, and just lean in on the front court and say, we're switching everything with this guy. Except for McConnell, we'll switch everything with this lineup. So Neesmith, Brissett is sort of the swing to me of, I understand that. Brissett can play the three enough to kind of get away with it. Jackson at the four, again, that's two lineups in a row I've had him at the four. I think because he's switchy, he can have value in these groups and a lot of groups, and that's going to be kind of a litmus test for me this season. If he can be a really switchy player who can switch basically onto any guy, which is something they talked about in training camp last year, and I've joked about this a lot on this podcast. Like you go into training camp as a reporter, and you know how these are going to go. You're going to ask about the rookie, and the veterans are going to say, "Oh, I don't remember who it was, but someone last year said Isaiah Jackson's been so impressive on defense. We think he can switch 1 through 5." And I just kind of shrug. I'm like, okay, whatever. No rookie can switch 1 through 5. That's not a real thing. They're just gassing him up. But he really could. That was a rare, extreme thing that kind of made sense. If he can carry that on and Jackson can really guard almost every position, seeing if he can be the 4 is really valuable, because then you know what you can invest in the 5 with Smith, with Turner, whoever, and still have Jackson on the floor providing value. Some other interesting numbers with some combinations of these guys last season. With TJ McConnell and Miles Turner on last season, the Pacers' defensive rating 108.9. Very good, in over 300 minutes. 108.9 defensive rating would have ranked 5th in the NBA, right? Those two together did good things for the Pacers. It was when LeVert was the point guard a lot last year. It was when they had Jeremy Lamb in the game a lot. Even Brogdon struggled defensively at times this past season. And McConnell, remember, got hurt 2 months into the year. They lost a lot of the opportunities to have those guys playing for much of the season. But the Pacers defense with those two out there was really good this past season as a combination, even in just limited minutes. Duarte plus Turner, similarly solid story. 109.9 with either combination of those two guys out there. 109.9 would be a top 10 defense this past season, right? And that's a lot of this is the case for Turner. But in general, even just one or two good perimeter defenders plus Turner for the Pacers last year was an above average defensive unit. If you get Neesmith to be a positive, or Isaiah Jackson can be switchy enough, and you have Turner out there are reasons to believe the Pacers can have a good one-stop lineup. Now, one guy I want to bring up here, besides talking about Brissett at the 3, who I already said, is Ben Mathurin. I mentioned him a little bit because rookies are typically bad at defense, with Duarte being a somewhat exception. Mathurin, though, is athletic enough and speedy enough that I think there's a chance he could be an option down the stretch of the season. If the Pacers get to March or whatever and they have 26 wins at that time or something, they know they're out of it. It might make more sense to turn to Mathurin in these situations, see what he can do, get him in these close game defensive situations, because the goal for the Pacers this year is, again, to focus on the future, to get your team set up to be as good as possible in the future. If that means playing Ben Mathurin in your best defensive fives or experimenting with him instead of someone else like Neesmith, like Brissett, whatever, that's fine. That makes sense for the Pacers to try. But I don't think if they need a one-stop situation early in the season, they would turn to something like that. Let's do one more here, an offensive-based unit, the shooters. The Pacers, finally, a quality shooting lineup. Let's talk about it. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, Locked On NBA is the way to go as they discuss the Pacers, the league at large, the schedule release. I don't know why I just said Pacers. The league at large, the schedule release, and all the latest and greatest news around the league. The Pacers last year were 25th in three-point percentage. 2 seasons ago, they were 17th in three-point percentage. 3 seasons ago, the Pacers were 14th in three-point percentage. That was their best year, the last year of McMillan. They have historically not been a good three-point shooting team, and they still might not be this year. They still might lack in this area. But they can put out a pretty funky and cool and effective shooters lineup this year. And part of the reason they're able to do that is because the point guard they would have in there is also a really good shooter. And that's why I think the Pacers, while not having a ton of threats from deep this year, have some interesting options for a shooter's lineup, which would be very fun, both in terms of offensive potency, but also because I talk about this a lot with Buddy Hield. I don't think it's just limited to him. In general, having spacing, having as many avenues as possible on the floor to allow plays to develop, having as many opportunities to make the defense bend, having as many opportunities to play 4-on-4 and simplify things so guys can see more NBA patterns is helpful for development. So if the Pacers can create some high spacing lineup situations, that would be a fantastic thing to go. So the shooters lineup, 5 guys, the only 5 guys who are returning from last season, ironically, who shot 35% or better from deep with a blue and gold jersey on. Tyrese Halliburton at the point guard spot, Buddy Hield obviously at the 2 guard spot, Chris Duarte at the 3, O'Shea Brissett at the 4, and Jalen Smith at the 5. Yes, a shooter's lineup without Miles Turner. I couldn't believe it. Pacers, again, 25th in three-point percentage last year, and everybody who I didn't say who's on the Pacers this year and was also on the team for part of last year was made 1/3 or worse of their threes in terms of percentage this past season. This is the only 5 passable-ish guys, but it's still a pretty good shooting lineup, especially if you get O'Shea Brissett from 2 years ago, for example. There's reasons to believe he might not be that guy, but that could be a shooter in that lineup. Or Aaron Neesmith from 2 years ago, 37% on over 100 attempts. Or college Aaron Neesmith, would definitely be in this lineup. Daniel Tice even was 36% with the Celtics down the stretch of last season. I don't think he would be in this group, but they have some other sneaky options. Turner, obviously, for a center, is a good shooter. They have options, but those 5 guys that I already named seem like they would be in the mix as the 5 best shooters that were on the Pacers last year. Very potent offensively. Any unit with Halliburton is potent offensively. Any unit with Halliburton plus Hield is potent offensively. And Jalen Smith gave the Pacers big plus minutes on the offensive end this past season, despite some shakiness and consistency and things like that. If they can get any sort of consistent shooting from Brissett, and I still am very high on Duarte's future as a shooter, this lineup can effing score. Like Halliburton can dribble and do stuff. Hield can sort of dribble and do stuff. Like they could create enough with this group to pass, to cut, to score. I would really like to see this group together. But what makes it so interesting to me is that it has a lot of spacing everywhere, right? You could take out O'Shea Brissett for Terry Taylor, and yes, you lose some shooting, but you'd have space for Terry Taylor to be Terry Taylor. You could take out Jalen Smith for Isaiah Jackson, and you'd lose some shooting, but there'd be a lot of space for Isaiah Jackson to be very dangerous. You could take out basically anybody. Losing Hield, you'd lose some spacing for sure. But at every other spot, if you put in Nembhard for Halliburton because you want to try Andrew Nembhard for a little bit, there's a lot of spacing for him to see the court, to throw his passes, and be the player that he can be. The spacing is really helpful for the development. I know I already talked about that, but just even if you take out one of these non-healed players, that you get a lot of that. You get a lot of opportunities there. And I think having Halliburton develop with Duarte, with that space, with that shooting, if they're two guys who can both be 38% guys together in a lineup, that would be extremely impressive. So just looking at the numbers from last season, as I have done way too often on the show already today, Tyrese Halliburton plus Buddy Hield lineups for the Pacers last year, 120. 120. No misspeaks there. 120 offensive rating. Holy. That'd have been the best in the league by a lot. If it, obviously not possible. Like the team that played the most minutes in the NBA last year, the Utah Jazz, played 3,900 minutes, almost 4,000 minutes, with Tyson Halliburton holy moly, I can't talk at all. With Halliburton and Hield together for the Pacers last year, we're talking about 750 minutes. That's still more than a lot of the ones I've brought up today. So a 120 offensive rating is insane. Their defense was terrible. But, that kind of speaks to what that group did together for the Pacers. They had chemistry already. They can both shoot. They can both dribble. And Hield became a better passer with this Pacers franchise. Like, that was a really potent duo. You add in any other young player who's trying to learn, trying to get space, I think you'll get a lot from that sort of thing. And Turner could be an option in this as well, especially if he's looking for more opportunities to be who he can be, to put the ball on the floor and make plays happen. And I think Smith can do a lot of those things, but they lose a ton defensively, obviously, in that sub. But seeing what you get with Jalen Smith on the offensive side of the ball with that lineup makes a lot of sense to me as well. So I think you could see either of those guys in the mix in that spot. And obviously Nesmith, if he ends up being the shooter that he at one point projected to be, would be fascinating to me in that situation as well. So they have more options, but I just think that when I was really digging into the Halliburton plus Hield numbers, it just jumped off the page in a way that I thought, oh my gosh, this is something they have to sort of explore. And I know that they're both insanely good shooters, especially Halliburton, but just seeing the numbers together was impressive. Now, two other guys and the wings they have in this group had a lot of success for the Pacers in pretty limited minutes as well, and that's Buddy Hield and Chris Duarte on the wing. We're talking about a small sample here because Duarte only played about 200 minutes after the trade deadline before his toe injury popped up and ended his season. But in the 100 minutes the Pacers played with Buddy Hield and Chris Duarte as their wings last year, 116.5 offensive rating, which would have ranked, a casual first in the league, and a 111.5 defensive rating, which isn't good, but would have ranked about 15th in the league. That's a good group, plus 5 net rating on lineups the Pacers had in the 100 minutes with both Hield and Duarte out there. A plus 5 net rating is a top 5 team in the league. Now, comparing lineups to league data, I'm burying myself here because I just did this like 100 times this episode. Typically not the best thing to do just because of the sample sizes enacted. The opponent quality matters. You're not getting a good scope of what's really going on. But I just want to give a basis for the numbers to compare to in these settings. And the Pacers, especially in the case of Buddy Hield on offense and Miles Turner on defense, those are the two extremes of, hey, the Pacers are really capable on defense when Turner's in there. And, oh my gosh, their offense was unbelievable with Buddy Hield out there. They were a horrible offensive team for stretches early in the season. They were the worst defensive team in the league for the last 3 months of the year. Blending it all together this year with new young pieces, with a full offseason of these guys, finding the right lineups, kind of makes it seem like the Pacers could, be, again, about as good as last year, despite talent-wise taking a step back. Maybe even a few more wins than last year. Something we talked about on a show earlier this week, diving into all these details with Jay Rigdon. It seems like they could be about the same level of team last year. And if they use some of these lineups in key situations or, throughout the season as they figure out who works with Halliburton, if he's as good as I think he'll be, they could actually be a pretty decent, compared to last year, about the same level team. I keep saying words that make it sound like I'm saying they're going to be much better. I don't think so, but there are lineups they can use, and there are a lot of numbers that indicate with the right groups out there, they could be an okay team. Now, there's a lot of lineups or players I didn't mention today, but I think you'll see but I think you'll see enough Andrew Nembhard to experiment this coming season. For example, I barely mentioned O'Shea Brissett that often today. Same with Daniel Tice. Like, those guys have a role they could help the Pacers with this coming season. They just didn't have as many numbers or lasting impression things that I could easily throw in for lineup. So there's a lot you could go with, and I'd love to hear from you on Twitter at TEastNBA, a lineup you think would be cool to watch for the Pacers this season. Or if you're on YouTube, please comment below. Give me something you want to see 5-man unit for the Pacers this coming season. And I'll talk about some of them with you because they have a lot of interesting options as a new look team. Tomorrow, no show. I will be on a trip out away from computer. But back Monday, talking schedule with Adam Friedman, then a player interview next week as well. And we'll talk a little international basketball. A couple of guys playing for their national teams late in this month, early next month for FIBA stuff. What to watch for in those games, how it could matter, all sorts of fun stuff. So lots to come here still on Locked On Pacers as August trudges along. So you won't want to miss all that. Thank you guys a ton for listening. Have a great day and weekend since I'll be out. And we will see you soon.